Hi everyone, my name is Brandy and I am the owner and artist behind Brush by Brandy. You guys are back here for another week on my YouTube channel. Thank you for hanging in there with me. This week we're working on kind of a cool project, and these are for a special customer of mine. I've done a whole bunch of pieces for them, and they actually own a wedding venue and a bed and breakfast that's in Angels Camp, California. It's called Nemeth Manor. So you guys go check them out on Instagram because it's a really beautiful venue. And they let you follow their story of making over the entire thing. But I've actually gotten to do a few pieces for them. So they've got a piece that's a bed frame that's in one of their suites. They've got a bedroom set in another suite. There's a bridal mirror that I've done, a table that I've done for them. And these are actually going in the same suite that the table's in. These are a set of tables here. And they actually come with a set of chairs, upholstered chairs. Now, when they brought these to me in the back of a trailer, I was like, yikes, I know just enough about upholstery to get myself into some trouble. So if you know upholstery well, I'm going to tell you right now, turn this video off. It's probably going to make you cringe a little bit. But I figured it out and they're done, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. So we are actually going to do a paint project and an upholstery project this week. So I'm going to show you beginner tips because I'm a beginner, so you'll hear it from the horse's mouth. So but you guys stick with me because I promised you it actually turned out decent. So hang in there. Let's go ahead and get started and see how these tables came to be and what the matching chairs end up looking like. Here is where I started on these chairs. The customer brought them to me, and this is what they look like. They did have some holes in the existing fabric, but the overall construction of them was a really nice quality, so he felt like they were definitely worth saving. When I am taking apart an upholstery project, I pay really close attention to how it's constructed when I'm doing the deconstruction. So what I'm looking for here is how this original upholstery fabric is stapled in. Number one, it's stapled in below the trim here, and so that's where I'm going to want to put my new staples. And then this trim here is just glued on to cover the staple line. So that's what I'm going to do, only I'm using a nail head trim. So while I'm taking this apart, I am just going to be ripping it apart, but I'm also going to pay close attention so that I know how I need to construct this back together. With my chairs all deconstructed, I want to go ahead and catch my tables up. I need to get them started by giving them a good cleaning. I'm going to use a TSP, and then I rinse that clean with water to remove any cleaning residue. So there's a total of 4 pieces. It's 2 chairs and 2 tables, and I went ahead and worked on them all at the same time. My first step was to give them a coat of Wisal primer in light gray. With my primer on, I coated my chairs and my tables both in 2 coats of a light gray paint. This color is called Limestone by Wisal Paint. The next thing I need to do is go ahead and pull some staples from these chairs, and there were a lot of them. This was not fun, but they needed to be out of the way so that I could come back and put my new fabric on. Here are all 4 of my pieces with 2 coats of primer and 2 coats of paint on. They're ready for the next step. I decided to do a decorative finish on these tabletops. I had considered sanding them down to the raw wood, but they had an inlay in the wood that I didn't think was very attractive. It was kind of dated, and so I'm going to go ahead and give it a faux finish. I took various shades of my Wisal glaze and I drizzled them onto my tabletop. The colors that I'm using are a brown, a black, and a gray. And then I'm going to go ahead and just brush them together randomly using a paintbrush. This is going to be a weathered wood finish. Once I've got them all brushed together in kind of a random pattern and I like the streakiness of it, I'm ready for my next step. I'm going to be using a silicone wood graining tool. I've got these available in my Amazon shop, linked in the description for this post. I'm going to run the wood graining tool over the top of my glazed finish, putting a little bit of pressure on the head of the graining tool and rocking it as I pull it across the tabletop. I alternate directions as I go so it looks like a planked finish. So on one pull, I'm going to start at the right side of the table, the next one will start at the left, and so on and so forth. I continue this process all the way across my tabletop, rocking and pulling as I go until I've got a complete wood grain finish over the entire tabletop. I make sure that I go around and also get the edges of my table as close to the edges as I can possibly get and leave some sort of pattern with my graining tool. I feel like this wood grain pattern is a little bit fake looking, and so I want to kind of tone it down a little bit so it looks a little more natural. My next step is going to be to take the same gray paint color that I used on the body of my piece, and I'm going to do a color wash over the top. So I'm applying a heavy dose of water to the surface of my table. I'm going to brush my paint over the top of it and then come back and wipe the paint back. This is going to take my faux wood finish and make it look like a weathered wood. But it's also going to tone down those browns and black and gray that I used in the grain texture, and it's going to make them closer to the colors that I'm using in my actual finish. I make sure and I keep this paint wash nice and wet until I've got a complete coat brushed over the top, and then I'm just going to take a rag and I'm going to brush it back and wipe back that paint using long, even linear strokes that go all the way from one end to the next end of the table. I make sure I don't start or stop in the middle of my table because that would leave uneven areas. So you know these tables and chairs are meant to match a table that's already going to be in the same room. So I want to make sure that I tie the finishes together. So I'm going to go ahead and brush on a coat of Wysol paint in a mixture of inkwell and black. And this gave me this nice sort of charcoal color. I'm going to brush it into the textured finishes on my table, and then I'm going to come back and wipe those away. I make sure and I keep these nice and wet as well because I don't want to leave any of this on my surface. I just want it to wipe away and leave some dark areas in the finish. I did add a layer of satin varnish before I did this just so my paint would wipe back nice and clean and I would only be left with those dark portions in the raised details. That satin clear coat makes my paint nice and sealed off so that it wipes away very clean and easily. I worked my way around the entirety of the tables and chairs, brushing this darker paint color into all the raised detail portions. That was a lot of work. All right, I've got all 4 of my pieces done with my dark paint into those details, and now I'm going to come back and I'm going to dry brush some Wysol paint in Antique Villa over the top of my finish. I'm using one of the Wysol premium brushes, and I'm just using a flicking motion and a very light amount of paint on my brush just to hit the very high points on these raised details with a little bit of that white. So now I've got 3 layers of paint. I've got my base coat of the gray, I've got the dark in the details, and then I've got this light white that's going to sit on the high points. It gives a lot of depth and dimension to this finish. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of redesign with Prima Decor wax, and this color is called Eternal. It's a nice rich gold. I'm just going to use my finger to apply it, and I'm going to lightly give some gilding, some gold details to the high points on these moldings. This gold is going to really make them stand out, but it's also going to tie into the nail head trim that I plan to use on the finished details for these chairs. I repeat the process across all 4 of my pieces, doing the dark and the low points, and then doing my dry brush of the antique villa over top, and then a little bit of my gilding wax until all of these were done. This is going to be the first fabric that I attach, and then I'm going to put my cushion on, and I'll cover the front again. So let's go ahead and get this back attached here. I try to save as many pieces from the old construction as I can, and one example of that is this interfacing. So interfacing is just a lining fabric, but it's very durable. Okay, this is just interfacing. You can buy this at the fabric store. It's called interfacing, and it's going to add some rigidity to this fabric. So I saved this from my chair deconstruction. It was underneath the fabric. I'm going to reuse it. In this case, I was not able to save any of the fabric. As soon as I pulled that cording off that was glued, it just tore the fabric. Otherwise, if you can, save your fabric and you can cut your new fabric template using your old fabric. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this ticking stripe fabric that I want to use on the back, and I'm going to lay this down, and I'm going to attach my interfacing to the inside of this. I'm going to use a little bit of spray adhesive. I'm going to use my Super 77 spray adhesive from 3M. I'm going to move my ticking stripe, and I'm just going to put some spray adhesive onto my interfacing. Yeah. I'm going to take my ticking stripe and lay that back down, and I'm going to attach my interfacing just using that spray adhesive. So I'm going to flip it upside down. I've got I'm going to try to center it kind of, and then I'm going to kind of marry the two together. All right, and that's just going to add to the durability of this fabric. Now, so this is what it's going to look like, but I need to staple it from this side. So I'm going to use a staple gun. I'm using a staple gun. Couple recommendations on a staple gun when you're doing an upholstery project. Do not try to use the hand powered ones, just the manual staple guns, unless it's like a really minor project. Those are great for minor projects. This is a little intense for just a manual staple gun. Your hand will hurt because you've got to put pressure on it. I'm using a pneumatic staple gun. It's attached to a compressor. The other option is an electric staple gun. All my staples need to fall inside this line. Okay, as long as they fall inside that line, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to make sure that I'm centered. And I'm going to start right here at the top. So I'm going to pull the trigger for the staple gun, and then I can apply the first staple. And it goes right in. Okay, I'm pushing the staple gun right up to that wood edge. Ideally, if I wasn't trying to show this on camera at the same time, I would be working from that side. If I end up with a staple in my groin, we're gonna have to stop this broadcast. And I'm just finding that line of my wood molding, and I'm writing all my staples right up to that wood line. Okay, and now I'm going to come down and I'm going to do the same thing to this bottom, but I'm going to pull it as taut as I can get it. Okay, I want to have no give in this fabric. This is my back, and I want it to be nice and tight. So I'm going to pull that down as far as I can, and I'm going to do the same thing, pulling it down as I go. I want to make sure I'm keeping my staples on the inside of that line in my wood, where they won't be seen at all. Okay, so now my fabric is nice and taut. As I come through and I do the sides, it's going to get even more taut, all right? And so what you're gonna see from the back, this is what you're gonna see from the back. Okay, so I'll get this all nice and tight. I'm gonna have to staple around this entire rim. This is my back cushion here. So this is just my same foam. I'm gonna reuse it, okay? I'm going to trim this excess before I do this part. I'm going to put my back on here, and I will probably use a little bit of spray adhesive to hold it in place. That will help me so it doesn't want to keep, adjusting as I go. I'll spray adhesive it into the place that I want. And then I'm going to take my face fabric, this is what you're actually going to see, and I'm going to do the same thing. Staple along the edges here. When I took it apart, it had a row of staples that you saw. I'm going to use nail head trim. So it comes in a package like this. These are available at the fabric store. I got these at Hobby Lobby because they had the color that I wanted, which is this kind of bronze color. You can get them on Amazon. It's a rope trim. Once I have that row of staples, I'm going to hide it under this. So this is what they did when they did it with cording when the chair was constructed. I'm going to hide that row of staples with my nail head trim. All my fabric will be trimmed out from under the edges, and all you're going to see is this nail head. The staples are going to fall in line right under. See how the trim runs all in a line? I need to keep my staples as straight as I possibly can on that last layer because I want to hide them under this row of nail head. Let's talk a little bit about the equipment that I used to put these chairs together. Okay, so I'm using a Dewalt compressor. This is a 27-gallon tank, and what I have it set as, here are my settings. And so let's take a look at the gun. I've got it attached to a long hose here, and let me show you guys the gun. On my initial video, I showed you guys a different type of gun, but I actually ended up using this one for the remainder of the project, and let me show you the reason. It's got a much narrower tip on it. Let's compare it to the other one. This is the initial stapler that I started with, and what it just meant is here where the staple actually comes out, I could not get it as close to the ridge of the wood on the chair as I wanted to. So I ended up switching this one out and using this guy here because I was able to get this nose right up in to the wood on that chair. It's a much smaller nose. And what I mean is when I was stapling up against that lip, so I just need to depress the orange tip on this, and once that is depressed, I can engage the trigger on this gun and it will release a staple. So let me show you what I mean. If I engage that nose right here, I can get that staple right up underneath the lip. And that is how clean the staples went in on these chairs. And then when I'm stapling, I just wanted to make sure that I got them as close in a line as possible because remember, I'm going to cover this all up using that nail head trim. So when I was stapling my fabric, I just made sure that I kept them all in a line, engaged that nose right under the trim of the chair, and went right into my fabric. With this one, I was not able to get that nose up under that lip. The staples would end up sticking out further. So this was not as good of a choice. And let me show you the staples I was using. These are the staples that fill that gun. They've got a nice depth on them and they're nice and narrow. So when they went into the wood of the chair, you barely even saw. The staples just drop in and then I can close up the gun and this is ready to use. All right, this was no easy task, but I got my fabric stapled all the way around the edges and nice and trimmed up as much as I could, as close to that staple line as possible. You can see the rough edges on my fabric. These rough edges will be a little bit of a problem when I come back to apply my nail head trim. So I came back with a bead of hot glue and I'm just going to hot glue the edges of my fabric so that I don't have any loose and hanging strings that tend to unravel over time or any that will hang out underneath the nail head trim. I ran this bead of hot glue all the way around my staple line around the entirety of these chairs, just cleaning up the loose fabrics as I went. This was a tedious process as well, as has been everything on these chairs. They were a big project, you guys, but I'm proud that they're done. Actually, the glue ended up being a help later. When I apply the nail head trim, it's actually going to help hold my nails in place, but it really kept those nice clean edges underneath my nail heads. I'm just using a traditional craft store glue gun and traditional craft store glue sticks for this. There are no special requirements for this gun. I found that this worked just fine. They do make special glue sticks for upholstery. You can use those if you choose. I also want to warn, I did end up with some burned fingertips. That glue is hot. I did use a little wooden stick to kind of press these fabrics into place. That helped protect my fingers. So with my glue done all the way around the fabric edges of my chair, I can finally apply my nail head trim. And this was probably the most exciting part, you guys. Once I got started on it, I did not want to stop. So this nail head trim came in a 5-yard rope. Each package was about $20, and I used a total of 3 on both of these chairs. Every 5th nail head on the rope has a hole in it that you apply a tack through, and then I'm just using a light tack hammer to hammer them into the wood. So this nail head trim is actually made of a fairly thin metal, so anywhere that I needed a hole to put a tack that it didn't have one, I was able to just take my drill and go ahead and drill a small hole and then put the pin nail through that. The only thing I did find is they do kind of short you on the pin nails, so if possible, grab an extra package of the loose nail heads. You might need some of those. The other thing I found with the pins is sometimes you'll bend one and then it becomes unusable, so it's a good idea to just have an extra package of those pin nails to replace any that you can't use. This trim does bend really easily, so I was able to just ride the curves of this chair, and then anywhere that I needed to make a turn or a curve, I was able to just maneuver the metal trim into exactly the shape that I needed it to be. I use one continuous rope around the seat, a continuous rope around the top of each, and then I use smaller pieces just to do around the arms. It probably took around 2 hours just to do all of the nail head trim. I do have a lot of time invested in these chairs, you guys. I would just say upholstery is big projects. They have big budgets. There's a lot of materials. I say I probably spent around $300 on just materials for these chairs. That's accounting for $30 a yard fabric, $30 in trim with 3 rolls, and then the paint materials that I used. But you guys, they turned out beautiful, and I know that these sets are very pricey. So I'm sure my experienced upholsterers are sitting there picking out all the things I probably did wrong, but overall, you guys, I'm really pleased with how they turned out. It's a beautiful set of chairs. They've got a lot of life left in them. The tables are absolutely gorgeous. I did spray everything in a clear coat. I did all that before I put my fabric on, so they're nice and sealed. You guys can find a materials list for everything I use in the description for this post. And as always, you can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and my website at brushbybrandy.com.